Each season, summer, fall, and winter, spring, the Loft schedules a huge variety of writing classes. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our teaching artist, Allison Vincent. Allison, could you introduce yourself and then also tell us how you got involved with the Loft?
For sure. My name is Allison Vincent. I'm a teaching and theater artist here in the Twin Cities. I'm also a writer, and I got involved with the Loft as a admirer and student. I've been really thrilled to take some great classes at the Loft. And then when I saw the call for courses in the wintertime, I was uh, just kind of thinking about this memoir class that I teach. I thought would be a really great fit. So I was excited to see that the Loft was in agreement on that, and here we go. Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up, that you're a theater, involved in theater and also a writer, because you're obviously teaching this class about memoir, but you have fiction pieces published as well.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you see specifically fiction and nonfiction on the page interacting.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of sensory details. So I think that sometimes when students are thinking about nonfiction, they forget that creative part. That you get to take all the amazing kind of literary techniques from fiction and bring it to party in creative nonfiction. And to me, I think that's such a lovely thing to do as the owner of a story, to look back at something that's a wonderful memory, but then really spend time there and refresh the details. There's always that question of, are we edging into fiction with, like, I don't really remember what color my mom's dress was, or things like that. And it's like, well, I err on the side of David Sedaris there, where it's like, well, you can fudge a little bit as long as what happened and kind of the overall truth is intact. But I find that people really, it's good for the soul to spend time in our memories and to really try and suss out those details, and then getting them on the page in a first draft so that it's just all there. Then starting to hone what you have into a really evocative, meaningful, beautiful second, third, fourth draft, then becomes something that other people can relate to, even though they weren't there with you. And I think that that's amazing, right? That's what writing's all about. Stephen King calls it telepathy, and I kind of had that in the back of my head all the time. It's like I'm trying to send this memory to somebody else. So that's what we're aiming for in the course, is telepathy.
I love that you brought David Sedaris into it. I got my MFA focused on creative nonfiction, and I think the most revolutionary thing I was taught, one of my professors was like, there's not any reason why you can't put on the page that you're not sure if something happened and then say it. And I was like,
Exactly.
okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and as a reader, it's exciting to have that kind of, it's almost like a conversation then with the author. Many of my favorite nonfiction authors do that very thing. And it's fun. It feels like we're in it together.
And so you also are involved in theater in a bunch of different places around the Twin Cities. So how else do you see spoken word coming into your craft?
So when I think of spoken word, obviously there's the poetry connection of like actual spoken word, but then there's also the literal dialogue, right, of theater. So when you write for the theater, that's always meant to be heard, right? It's meant to be spoken aloud. Um, as you might see in the little blog I wrote for the Loft's artist blog, I talk about reading to myself. I read to myself all the time. That's like my number one way that I can check with my ears to see if what I'm saying is working, especially when I don't have the luxury of having a room full of actors and producers being like, boo. So I have to rely on myself and my ears as my kind of initial first draft editor. But once you become attuned to the way that people speak, you kind of, that little writer part of your brain turns on when you're out and about or at a bar or at a coffee shop or in class. You start to become nosy in like a really exciting and fun way, and taking down details to record later on. I'm a big proponent of journaling every day too, not necessarily to say how you're feeling, although that's really useful for a lot of people, but just to capture details of like, I heard the most insane thing today at the bus stop. It's like whatever that person said, and then trying to imagine what they were talking about, because you're just taking one thread of some conversation with you on your way as you leave those characters on the street. So yeah, dialogue to me is really about capturing the authenticity of someone else's voice, and then giving it context through your eyes because it's your memoir you're writing.
Yeah, and dialogue just trips so many writers up. It's interesting because you think in nonfiction writing dialogue would be just like, oh, of course I'm going to write this and make it sound natural. It's what someone actually said.
Yeah,
But I think even more so in nonfiction, we get caught up on just like, hyper analyzing. Oh my gosh, does this sound like what someone said? Is this what they actually said? Is this how the conversation went? Um, so that just emphasis on dialogue too, I feel like so useful.
for sure. And I think too, thinking about how it's ultimately serving the story, like what's it there for, and then also how is it impacting the rhythm. One thing about theater is when you have something out loud, you can hear the rhythm and you can hear where things are supposed to, you're supposed to hold for laughs or whatever the case might be. In writing, like what you were saying with David Sedaris, where he kind of has internal monologues with himself and the reader, you can do that with whatever people say too, right? So you can interrupt dialogue and say like, I had no idea what to do next, and then whatever your response was. So there's lots of opportunity for play as well with dialogue within a written page.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the class that you're teaching specifically. And we touched on this a little bit on memory, right? Because you're talking about memoir and how you pull memory out. And memory is obviously a huge font of inspiration for creativity. But I think because it's so huge, it can feel just so overwhelming. So
Yeah,
how do you help guide students in pulling from this giant thing to making it something that they can put on the page in a way that serves the story?
for sure. I love time prompt writing. So I often do that, especially for assignments or writing projects that require us to use our memory when it is really broad and scary like that, is to ask leading questions that elicit responses from your own experience. And then using those as building blocks, right? So at least you have something on the page. And the timed portion of it is just like write whatever is on the tip of your brain while you have it there, and then forcing the student to move on so that it's, now we're already thinking about something else. You can't self edit or critique. You can do that later when we go through and read through all the pages and find, okay, what are the gems, what are the nuggets of gold that I can pull out, and then and make kind of a longer expansion.
And memoir is sort of a tricky genre, and I'm looking at this from I work as a literary agent, so from a publishing perspective too. What is it that you think makes a memoir just really, really successful?
So for me, I think the big picture thing that I think makes the memoirs that I love the most successful is the idea of specificity of that person's experience, but also then building that connection for the reader of this universal truth, right? So even though, I wasn't born in Ireland during a time of intense poverty, with, an alcoholic father and a huge family, I relate so much to Frank McCourt, right? And his experience in Angela's Ashes. And it's because of the way that he views humanity and the way that he, just shares the vulnerability that he experienced as a child. I really tap in with that. And then, of course, if you align with somebody in other ways, I also grew up Catholic. I have Irish in my heritage. So those pieces were, little Easter eggs for me. But even if I wasn't, there's so much from that particular memoir that I'm able to relate to. Same with David Sedaris. I think he goes out of his way to have these absurd interactions with people. But he always manages it to bring that point home of about some central essential truth of being a human being. So I think that's what we're after when we move from developing the memory part to then making it into a readable, shareable text.
Yeah, I love that. I think a big barrier for people thinking about writing memoir is, why would anyone care? Why would
Right.
anyone care about my life? Why would anyone care about my experience? And being able to really focus on, okay, you're right. That's a good question. Why would they care? Like,
Yeah.
how can you extrapolate from this to make them care about your life through the lens of their own life? Because let's be real, readers are very selfish,
Yeah.
it's just how we are.
Mhm.
And outside of memoir specifically, or any other classes you might teach, what is it that you're really hoping that students are going to gain from your classes?
I always, no matter what class I'm teaching, I always hope students gain confidence. Um, it's scary, it's especially with memoir. Memoir is a very, it's literally personal. It's something we maybe want to keep close to our chest. There's all those memes that CNF and memoir writers have about like, hey, you want to make your family mad? Publish a memoir. Um, so we're not asking anyone to do that. But I think if you can gain confidence in your skills as a writer, and then you have all this great expertise as the owner of this life that you're talking about. So that part's already done for you. It's really about then finding the bravery to share that, right? So having a workshop model in class, I think, is absolutely key in developing trust amongst the participants so that everybody does feel comfortable and like we have a shared safe space to be able to tell their story and then to develop it too, so that they're getting constructive feedback. But yeah, confidence is always the goal, but particularly with memoir, to have that feeling that, oh, my story is worth telling, you know? I think that is the best thing that a student can walk away from my class feeling.
Well, I'd also like students to be able to get to know you a little bit more. So when you aren't writing or teaching or in the theater, that limited time that you do have, what is it that you really enjoy doing with your time?
So during the pandemic, I became like a smoker, not like a smoker, but like a pit smoker. So I bought a pellet smoker, and that's been a hilariously expensive hobby my wife tolerates. And then I really love horror movies and things like that. So I'm usually watching, I'm a part of a movie club where we create PowerPoint presentations for each other because we are super nerds. So finding really obscure, bizarre movies and then researching them and then sharing them with friends is always like a highlight of my kind of personal time with friends.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I have loved doing these interviews over the past couple of years because I feel like when I ask this question, everyone's like, well, my weird COVID hobby has been.
I read that either you started smoking meat or craft brewing. So I went with smoking meat.
Yeah, you went one way or the other.
Yeah.
Well, Allison, thank you so much for being here with us. For
Yeah,
all
thank
of
you
our
so much.
viewers, you can find Allison's classes as well as our full lineup by visiting loft.org/classes. Allison's memoir class is going to be great. And I'm also looking forward to any classes that you teach in the future.
Thank you so much.